As people, we often reminisce about how good things once were. As a child, my parents would complain about my music because the music of their generation is better, according to them. I'm sure their parents, my grandparents, had the same complaint as well. I host a podcast where we relive the 1980s and 90s as if they were the greatest decades. But the reality is, with every positive in history, there is a negative. And that is the question posed by Edgar Wright's Last Night in Soho, a film that points out how nostalgia isn't necessarily as fantastic as we might think it is, especially for anyone who is not a white male. Last Night in Soho stars Thomasin McKenzie as Eloise. And I need to pause here for just a second to do a quick shout out for another Thomasin McKenzie film called Jojo Rabbit, which I loved and don't think has received enough recognition. Okay, back to Last Night in Soho. Thomasin McKenzie plays Eloise, or Ellie, a young girl who lives with her grandmother. Like her mother, Eloise wants to be a fashion designer. She is accepted to a design school in London. Before leaving, we learn Eloise sees dead people, specifically in the form of her deceased mother, reflected in a mirror. The mirror is a recurring item throughout the film to show the similarities and differences between the two worlds portrayed. Arriving in London, Eloise is roomed with the cast of Mean Girls. Not really, but basically. The group of girls takes an instant disliking to her wide-eyed, out-of-water country girl, because that's what mean girls do. Moving out of her dorm into a room in Soho, Eloise begins having vivid dreams following a girl by the name of Sandy, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, a confident singer in the 1960s. Eloise loves the 60s, as we learn throughout the running soundtrack of the movie, a technique that Wright used heavily in Baby Driver. Sandy is lovely, dresses in fantastic clothing that Eloise uses in her designs and personal appearance. But they are far from the same, as Sandy gets involved with a manager played by Matt Smith, and Eloise's sporadic behavior brings her to the attention of John, played by Michael Ajao, the love interest. The performances by almost everyone in the film are stellar, except for one, unfortunately, that of Michael Ajao. This is the first film I've seen him in, so I can't say if his lackluster performance was his fault or that of Wright not providing the correct direction, or simply at Edgar Wright writing a character that is one-dimensional and whose actions throughout the film are unjustified. Yes, Mackenzie is an attractive girl, but beyond that, the only interaction he has with her is with her being dismissive to him or behaving in what would come across as crazy to a normal human. So why is he so into her? We don't really know, other than he was written that way. There's a lot to unpack in Last Night in Soho, which could be why a lot of reviewers are having issue with the film. Is this a horror film or a psychological thriller? Is it about sexism, mental health, toxic masculinity, or toxic nostalgia? There's a lot of #MeToo in this as well, especially as we follow Sandy's story, where the past is only a happy place for white men. For me, where this film really stands out is in the cinematography and art department. Director of photography, Chung Hoon Chung, does a beautiful job transitioning between the two worlds of the present and the 60s, especially in the use of mirrors with Mackenzie and Taylor-Joy mirroring each other. The camera movement involves nice, slow tracking shots. Wright doesn't use handheld, shaky camera movement full of extreme close-ups to create drama, like many of the current crop of lazy filmmakers we see in cinema nowadays. The fashion and choreography all come together to create a world that is, in fact, beautifully nostalgic, while also having a dark underbelly. Another area where Wright shines is his use of music. We have seen this in his films past, such as the previously mentioned Baby Driver. In Last Night in Soho, he continues his use of music to tell the story, which reminds me of music soundtracks from the 90s. It seemed then that most movies had an accompanying soundtrack for fans to buy the CD. This doesn't happen as much in films these days, but it does in this one, thanks to songs by Dusty Springfield, The Kinks, and more. Some might say it's a little over the top, for example, using Wishin' and Hopin' when she is wishing for something to happen, or the use of Eloise by Barry Ryan because the main character's name is Eloise, which, to be honest, isn't that great of a song to begin with. However, barring that song, the music for me works, in the same way a music video works for a song. The end of the film is a bit of a letdown, And I can't go into too much detail here without giving it away, but don't let that dissuade you from seeing this movie, as there is a lot worth seeing in it. Do I love this film? No. Do I hate it? Also no. Edgar Wright is a fantastic filmmaker, which is on display in this movie throughout. However, his attempt at plugging into the zeitgeist Me Too movement is a bit in your face, with a script that could have probably used another rewrite or two. To enjoy this movie, let go of what you expect from Edgar Wright, appreciate the visually striking cinematography, and, don't get your hopes too much into the story.